On my 18th birthday, my family handed me an eviction notice from my own home. We need it more, they laughed together. I said nothing, just signed some papers and left. But on their wedding day, when the sheriff arrived with real ownership documents, their celebratory smiles instantly vanished. I'm 23 now, but I still remember that day 5 years ago, the day my entire world fell apart. My 18th birthday should have been a celebration, but instead, it became the moment I realized just how little I meant to the people who were supposed to love me the most. Some background. My grandfather was a successful real estate investor who built our family's fortune through smart property deals. When he passed away 8 years ago, he left behind a substantial estate, including the house I grew up in. What no one except my grandfather's attorney knew was that the house had been specifically left to me in his will, with the condition that ownership would officially transfer on my 18th birthday. Until then, my parents were allowed to live there as trustees, but legally, the property was mine. My parents had divorced when I was 13, and my father moved out. My mother stayed in the family home with me, but over the years, she became increasingly bitter about her financial situation after the divorce. She started dating again within a year and eventually met my stepfather, a man who shared her materialistic values and entitled mindset. I never got along with my stepfather. From the very beginning, he saw me as competition for my mother's attention and resources. When they announced their engagement 2 years before my 18th birthday, things only got worse. They started making offhand comments about their future in the house and how they had big renovation plans. Once the annoying teenager was out of the way, I never thought much of it. I assumed they were just being their usual selfish selves. I was focused on finishing high school and had already been accepted to a state university about an hour away. To save money, I planned to commute from home, something I had discussed with my mother, and she had seemed fine with it. The betrayal. Then came my 18th birthday. I came home from school to find my mother, stepfather, and, surprisingly, my father all sitting in the living room with strange smiles on their faces. There was no cake, no presents, just an envelope on the coffee table. It was early summer, and I had just graduated from high school a few weeks before. "Happy birthday, son," my father said, sliding the envelope toward me. "We have something important to give you." I opened it, expecting maybe a check or a gift card. Instead, I found an eviction notice, formally ordering me to vacate the house within 30 days. I stared at them in shock. "What is this?" I asked. My mother laughed. "We need the space, honey. You're an adult now, time to fly free." "But I'm starting college next month," I protested, my voice barely above a whisper. "We talked about me living here and commuting." My stepfather snorted. "Plans change. Your mother and I need the house more than you do. We're getting married in 3 months, and we want to start renovations right away." "But where am I supposed to go?" I asked. My father shrugged. "You can crash at my apartment for a while, I guess. The couch pulls out." The casual way he said it made it painfully clear he wasn't actually interested in helping me. I looked at the three of them, sitting there smugly, as if they had orchestrated some brilliant scheme. That's when it hit me. They had planned this together. My father, who barely paid child support and had minimal involvement in my life after the divorce, had somehow reconciled with my mother and stepfather just enough to help them kick me out. "We also need you to sign these," my mother added, sliding a stack of papers across the table. "Just some formalities about the property." I glanced at the papers, too shocked and hurt to fully process them. There was something about transferring ownership rights. I now realized they were trying to get me to sign away my inheritance without my knowledge. "I need to read these first," I said quietly. My stepfather rolled his eyes. "It's just standard stuff. Your grandfather left some outdated provisions in his will about you having a right to live here. But since you're going to college anyway, it makes sense to clear this up now." That's when something clicked. A memory of my grandfather telling me when I was 10. "One day, all of this will be yours." I made sure of it. Back then, I had never thought much about it, assuming he was just talking about some vague idea of family legacy. "I think I should talk to my grandfather's attorney first," I said. My mother's face darkened. "Why would you need to do that? This is a family matter." If it involves grandfather's will, I'd like to understand it. I took the papers and went to my room. That night, I couldn't sleep. The next morning, I skipped school and went straight to my grandfather's attorney's office. The attorney, a kind older man who had always treated me with respect, was shocked when I showed him the papers. "They tried to get you to sign these?" he asked, flipping through the documents. "This is highly unethical, possibly even illegal." He explained that my grandfather had indeed left the house to me, with full ownership transferring on my 18th birthday. My parents had known about this provision but had likely assumed they could pressure me into signing away my rights once I came of age. "What should I do?" I asked. "Don't sign anything," he advised. "Let me handle this. In the meantime, it might be best if you stay elsewhere. They can't legally evict you from a property you own, but given the circumstances, it might be safer." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of vindication and deep sadness. The people who were supposed to protect me were trying to steal from me. Playing along. When I returned home, my mother immediately demanded to know where I had been. "I just needed space to think," I told her. "I'll be staying with a friend for a while." I packed some essentials and left, not mentioning my visit to the attorney. Over the next few weeks, I stayed with my best friend's family, who took me in without hesitation when they heard a simplified version of what had happened. Meanwhile, the attorney was building a case, documenting every attempt my family made to pressure me. My mother and stepfather continued planning their wedding, assuming I would eventually cave and sign the papers. They even sent me an invitation with a handwritten note. "Hope you'll have found your own place by then. P.S. Bring those signed papers with you." The attorney advised me to play along while he worked on the legal strategy. "Let them think they've won," he suggested. "Sometimes the best revenge is letting people hang themselves with their own rope."
So I pretended to comply.
I texted my mother, saying I understood their position and would bring the signed papers to the wedding. This seemed to satisfy them, and the harassment temporarily stopped. During those 3 months, I worked part-time at a local bookstore, saved money, and deferred my college enrollment to the spring semester to deal with the situation. The attorney helped me access some of my inheritance funds to cover future tuition and living expenses. He also revealed something I hadn't known. My grandfather had not only left me the house, but also a significant trust fund that would fully mature when I turned 25. The day of their wedding arrived. The ceremony was being held at an upscale venue in town, with a reception planned at the house afterward. I showed up at the ceremony, sitting quietly in the back, watching as they exchanged vows. But all I could think about was how they had tried to rob me of my inheritance and throw me out onto the street. After the ceremony, guests began making their way to the house for the reception. I arrived early, along with my attorney and a sheriff, who had the legal paperwork proving my ownership of the property. When my mother and stepfather arrived with the first group of guests, they found us waiting in the driveway. "What's going on?" my mother asked, her white dress gleaming in the afternoon sun. The attorney stepped forward. "I'm representing the legal owner of this property, who has not authorized its use for today's event." My stepfather laughed. "What are you talking about? This is our house." The sheriff handed them the documentation. According to county records and the properly executed will of the previous owner, this property belongs solely to your stepson. He has not granted permission for this gathering. The look on their faces was something I would never forget. The blood drained from my mother's face, while my stepfather turned an alarming shade of red. "This can't be right," my mother whispered. The attorney clarified, "Your son became the legal owner when he turned 18, 3 months ago. The papers you attempted to have him sign would have transferred ownership to you illegally." Guests started arriving, confused by the scene unfolding in the driveway. "You can't do this," my stepfather snarled. "We have 100 people coming here." I looked him directly in the eyes. "Actually, I can. And I am." The sheriff explained their options: cancel the reception or find another venue immediately. There would be no celebration in my house. My mother broke down, mascara streaking down her face. "How could you do this to me on my wedding day?" she sobbed. "The same way you handed me an eviction notice on my 18th birthday and told me you needed the house more," I replied calmly. My father, who had just arrived, tried to intervene. Come on, son, he said. Can't you let them have their reception and sort this out tomorrow? I turned to him. Like you let me sort out being homeless?
No.
This ends now. The sheriff began instructing guests to return to their vehicles. My aunt, my mother's sister, stormed up to me, furious. You're ruining your mother's special day. How could you be so selfish? I looked at her, unshaken. Ask her about the eviction notice she gave me on my birthday, I said. Ask her about trying to trick me into signing away my inheritance. As word spread among the guests, the atmosphere shifted. Some people left immediately. Others lingered, watching the drama unfold with barely concealed interest. My stepfather, growing desperate, made one last attempt. Name your price, he hissed. Everyone has a price. I shook my head. Not for this house. Then, looking at my mother and stepfather, I added, You have 1 hour to remove your essential personal belongings. Anything left behind, you can arrange to pick up next week. Where are we supposed to go? My mother cried. I shrugged. I hear Dad's couch pulls out, I replied, echoing the same callous suggestion they had made to me 3 months earlier. As they frantically gathered their belongings, wedding guests dispersed, and the catering company packed up their untouched food. I stood in the driveway, watching the chaos unfold. I didn't feel happy or satisfied, just justified. That night, they ended up staying at a hotel. Later, they moved in temporarily with my stepfather's brother until they found their own place. I heard they tried to salvage the reception by relocating to a restaurant, but most of the guests had already left. Moving forward, later that evening, after everyone was gone, I walked through the house that was now truly mine. In the living room, I found a pile of unopened wedding gifts. The next morning, I donated them all to a local charity. In the weeks that followed, my mother called me repeatedly. Eventually, I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop. She alternated between tearful apologies and bitter accusations. We were just trying to secure our future, she explained, as if that justified everything. By destroying mine? I asked. She had no answer for that. As expected, my father sided with her. He told mutual friends and family that I was cruel and vindictive. Some believed him, and I lost relationships with extended family members who chose to accept their version of events. My stepfather even threatened legal action, claiming they had invested money into the property over the years. My attorney shut that down quickly with documentation proving that any improvements had been minimal and had been covered by the home maintenance trust my grandfather had established. 6 months later, I sold the house. It held too many painful memories, and I wanted a fresh start. The proceeds allowed me to buy a smaller place closer to campus and invest the rest for my future. My mother and stepfather eventually rented an apartment in another town. Through mutual connections, I heard that financial strain and the humiliation of what happened at their wedding took a toll on their marriage. They divorced 2 years later. As for me, I graduated college last year with a degree in business administration. I now work at a marketing firm and have built a life surrounded by people who genuinely care about me. My best friend's family still invites me over for the holidays. Sometimes, I think about what might have happened if I had just signed those papers that day, how easy it would have been to give in to their pressure and manipulation. I'm grateful every day that I had the instinct to seek help and the courage to stand my ground. My grandfather once told me, character is revealed not in times of comfort, but in times of conflict. I think he would be proud of how I handled the situation, protecting not just the assets he left me, but also my dignity and self-respect. The house is gone now, but the lesson remains. Family isn't always defined by blood. And sometimes, the people who should love you the most are the ones you need to guard yourself against the most carefully. Final notes. Thank you for all the supportive comments. To address some common questions. Yes, this all happened in the US, specifically in a state with strong inheritance laws. No, I don't regret my actions. The confrontation on their wedding day wasn't planned for drama. It was simply when all the legal documentation was ready and when they planned to use my property without permission. I haven't fully cut contact with my mother, but our relationship is minimal and on my terms. As for my grandfather's attorney, yes, he was incredible. He even reduced his fees significantly because my grandfather had been one of his favorite clients, and he was appalled by my family's behavior.